So thank you for coming in the torrential rain. For those of you in the audience, we are experiencing monsoon-like rains outside, so hopefully some of it can get to my home state of California. My name is Kathleen Smith. I'm the Chief Outreach Officer of ClearedJobs.Net, which is a veteran-owned security cleared job board and job fair company. We have many jobs that are down here in the Tampa area, but we didn't want to do a full job fair the same day as the MacDill job fair, so we thought we would just have an engagement. An engagement is having conversations about what impacts various different aspects of your cleared job search. So we're starting off today with a discussion with one of our friends who's a security clearance attorney, and then afterwards we will be doing a recruiter panel with two recruiters who are familiar with this area and searching and recruiting for jobs here in the Tampa area. So Tony, thank you for coming. This is Tony Kuhn from Tully Rinckey. Tully Rinckey is a security cleared adjudication firm, and they do many of our blog posts that are on our website. So Tony has a very distinguished career that I would not be able to do any justice to, so I asked him to give his own introduction.
Sure. Again, my name is Tony Kuhn. I started in the military at age 17, so coming up on about 26 years. I'm a combat veteran. I've held a security clearance for most of that time as well, so I know that I probably have a lot in common with people who are tuning in today and here. So I eventually worked my way into becoming an attorney. I transitioned to the reserves and then went to law school. So I'm a security clearance and military law attorney now. I'm an adjunct professor for the University of Buffalo School of Law. I teach military law there. I am the chair of the Veterans and Economic Transition Conference, a large event that we hold in Albany on an annual basis. I've been the chair of that for a few years now. And I am the chair of the National Security Lawyers Association, which is a local nonprofit that we started just recently within the past year. And that's really geared towards this type of event and trying to help provide information for people who are seeking information regarding national security. So we have a board now of security clearance attorneys spread across the United States. And I am the chair of our national security practice group for Tully Rinckey as well.
So you might know a few things about security clearances and what you need to be concerned about. So when we're going to be talking about our questions, we're trying to, have real life experiences that you may have in your history and what you should or should not be doing. And I really appreciated the time that Anthony had with preparing for this presentation and also bringing his family down here to the rain, but it's snowing in Buffalo, so I think that's a little bit better. So how has the implementation of continuous monitoring changed the type of issues that are raised for cleared professionals versus what we were dealing with before?
So they've changed the way that they monitor individuals who hold security clearances over the past few years. Traditionally, there were periodic reinvestigations, or what we call PRs, sometimes we abbreviate it as PR. For an individual holding a secret clearance, it's every 10 years. For an individual holding a top secret clearance, it would be every 5 years. And individuals who held those clearances would be reinvestigated to see if they're still suitable for a clearance or still eligible for a clearance at 5 or 10 years. And if something comes up that caused a trigger, triggers a guideline violation. And for those who don't know, there's 13 adjudicative guidelines that are reviewed every time. Things like alcohol, drugs, information technology systems, financial considerations, things like that. So if you get a guideline triggered at the 5-year or 10-year reinvestigation, you might have to litigate to keep your security clearance. Well, a few years ago, they decided that that wasn't enough. They want to now continuously monitor individuals. So if you hold a security clearance, you're constantly under, for lack of a better term, some type of surveillance. So they're checking your finances, they're checking your criminal record. They want to know if you're doing anything that they can track that would trigger a guideline violation. And then if that happens, you're going to get what we call written interrogatories, which is just a written list of questions, or you're going to get a statement of reasons in the mail, and you're going to have time to respond to the statement of reasons, submit a written response, some type of allegation against you that you violated at least one of the adjudicative guidelines. So that's the system now. So you no longer can wait the 5 or the 10 years. You have to report those issues as they occur now.
Now, you just used a term that we hear a lot, statement of reasons. Do you want to
Sure.
describe that a little bit more?
So at any point during the adjudication process, sometimes it happens in response to your initial application. Sometimes it happens during a periodic reinvestigation. Some individuals are issued a statement of reasons, and that's the reasons why they intend to revoke your security clearance. So you'll get a letter that says, we've made an interim decision that we're going to revoke your security clearance. Here are the allegations against you, and it will usually, not always, but usually specifically lay out the adjudicative guidelines that they think that you violated. Again, guideline A, B, A is allegiance to the United States, and then it can go through the entire 13, and we usually see anywhere from 1 to 4 alleged violations in the statement of reasons, and then those are the reasons that you're potentially going to lose your clearance. You now have to mitigate each of those reasons and concerns, and if you can mitigate them, then you keep your security clearance.
And how long of a process is that? I mean, do you need to jump on it right away? Can you wait?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because you get the statement of reasons and you go, uh-oh, my security clearance is going to be denied. And people tend to panic, because a lot of times that means you could lose your job. So they want to hurry up and submit a response. You're given 30 days. Under COVID, they extended a lot of the deadlines to 60 days. Take the time to mitigate the concerns. Don't rush. They don't care what you have to say. They care what you can prove. So saying that you went to counseling, for example, that's not going to get you anywhere. But actually providing a mental health evaluation or a counselor's evaluation, depending on if it's drug or alcohol related or mental health, actually getting the supporting documents and proving what you're going to say in your response is way more important than just saying something, because they're not going to take your word for it. So take the time, don't rush, and put together a really thorough response. Our responses usually range between 50 and 100 pages. So, but we win a lot of cases that way because we're very thorough in mitigating concerns.
So how has continuous monitoring changed the way clearance usage should be reported and mitigated?
So under continuous monitoring, you can't wait anymore. You have to do what we call a self-report. So if something happens where an individual who holds a clearance, say they go out this weekend and get a DWI or DUI, depending on the state you're in, you have to report that. If you don't report the DWI or the DUI, you're going to get a call at some point in the near future that says, hey, you got arrested. We were notified that you were arrested. You didn't report that you were arrested. You're required to report that information. So we're going to get you with a criminal conduct violation, but then we're also going to hit you with a guideline E, which is personal conduct for intentionally omitting information. And the statement of reasons, which we talked about, is going to come to you and it's going to say, do you deny or admit that you got this DWI? Can you mitigate the concerns regarding that DWI? And then there's going to be another allegation that you intentionally withheld that information. You want to talk about a difficult guideline to overcome. You can overcome alcohol, you can go to counseling, you can educate yourself, you can do things to mitigate the concerns, but it's very difficult to mitigate the concerns surrounding an allegation that you intentionally withheld information, because your only response is, no, I didn't. It's very difficult you can't put documents together to prove it. So what we tell people is you do a self-report, especially now under this continuous monitoring. Do a self-report if you know or believe that it's a potential guideline violation and everything is in writing. So I know we've talked about this before. You never just call and talk to somebody and say, hey, I got a DWI, or hey, I have to report marijuana or something. If you do that, you're calling a person who's going to interpret your comments based on their life experience, and then they're going to trigger an incident report or create an incident report, or they're going to trigger some type of negative consequence for you based on their perception of what you said. And if it's somebody who's never drank in their life and you call them and tell them, and they have a newborn child, or maybe a son or daughter who was killed by a drunk driver or something like that, and you call and say, I got a DWI last week, it's going to turn into so much worse than if you just put in writing exactly what you wanted the record to say. So we do all self-reports in writing for two reasons. One, we get to create the report. We get to create proof of the self-report. So if someone comes back later and tries that guideline E, personal conduct violation for intentionally omitting information, you say, no, I don't know what they did with it, but here's proof that I reported it because I reported it in writing, and here's the email, or here's the proof. So that's number one. We get to create a record of the report. And then number two, we get to steer the narrative. So you can build mitigation into your report. You can talk about exactly what happened and then what you've done already to mitigate the concerns. And sometimes just providing the mitigation, the appropriate mitigation in your self-report is enough to win at that stage, and you never get the statement of reasons or you never get your security clearance revoked. If you don't do a good job with the self-report, you could be litigating, you could lose your clearance.
So self-report, document.
Self-report right away.
Document.
I mean, get some help, talk to somebody who's got experience in this type of situation, but yeah, document your self-report and make sure that you provide good mitigation in your self-report as well.
So we often hear that older clearance holders have more issues with alcohol and drugs, whereas younger professionals tend to run into information systems issues. Can you talk about where you typically see cleared professionals running into problems and why?
Sure. I think those both make sense. And I think because, people like myself, for example, I've got, a record of 20 years holding a security clearance, but I've also been able to drink now for 20 years. So maybe I've put myself, me being older puts me in a position where I've drank more and I've been more in a position to be able to trigger a guideline like that where someone younger might not. And as far as you said with the younger individuals getting into trouble with the information technology system, I mean, who has kids, right? They've got an electronic device in each hand and they're on social media and they're doing something. And I'm always repeating to my kids, email is forever. If you do something on the internet, it's forever. No, I can just delete it. No, it doesn't work that way. So those two are pretty common. And that makes sense. But a couple that we see most often, we see guideline F, which is financial considerations. We see this one a lot. Maybe individuals didn't file their taxes on time, and a lot of times they'll come back and say, well, I didn't owe any money. The government doesn't care. They want you to file your taxes because you're not following the rules. And that's an issue. They want to make sure that everybody's going to follow the rules. So filing taxes and then student loan debt is a big one. We hear about student loans. It's in the media every day. Student loans are very common, but falling behind on student loans, that's the federal government's money. So they're going to chase you down for that money, and it's gonna be a problem if you try to get a security clearance. So guideline F is a big one, and then drugs is the second most common that we see. Not really serious drugs, but individuals who smoked marijuana in college or used Adderall that wasn't their actual prescription in college. I can't tell you how common that is. I didn't, when I was in college, I didn't see that go on. I'm sure it was, but I mean, I talked to people, at least one person a week, looking for legal assistance because they used Adderall in college to help them study and it wasn't their prescription, or because they used marijuana and they were in a state where it's legal, even though we all know it's not legal federally. So those issues come up a lot. And, there's a huge number of individuals right now who hold security clearances who have used marijuana. It's not really something that's going to limit you. It's being dishonest and using it too much. That's going to cause a problem.
Great segue into our next question, which is, marijuana, as you said, has been decriminalized in many states, yet at the federal level, it remains illegal. How would you counsel someone who is a clearance holder, but in a moment of weakness, smoked a little or took marijuana for pain or anxiety?
So it's important to understand that the federal government considers marijuana to be a Schedule I drug. They don't. I think everybody is kind of wondering if that's appropriate at this point, and I'm sure it's going to change in the near future. I'm really confident of that. But right now, the federal government considers it to be a Schedule I drug, so they're very serious about it. They don't really differentiate between medical marijuana or recreational marijuana to the federal government because they have to enforce the rule. Maybe they don't agree with it, but most of the people we deal with have to enforce the rule, regardless of their opinion. And to them, it's illegal. So it doesn't matter what you're doing or the reason you're doing it. And what they look at is they look at recency and frequency. So how recent is the use and how frequent is the use? If you're using marijuana just recreationally every day, for the past couple of years, and you're applying for a security clearance this month and you say, I'm going to stop, they're probably not going to believe you. If you're using marijuana for medicinal purposes, even though they're going to tell you it's wrong, but you're using it for medicinal purposes, and you get to the point where you're applying for a security clearance and you say, I have figured out something else that has worked. I'm going through these therapies. I'm doing these different treatments. I'll no longer use marijuana. I was only using it for medicinal purposes. Then you have a decent chance of getting a security clearance. So I guess my advice, it would depend on the marijuana use, the reasons, the frequency, the recency. But my number one advice would be just to be honest, because it's much more difficult to mitigate being dishonest than it is to mitigate marijuana use. So I talk to people all the time who have used marijuana a few times. They got advice from some recruiter or something happened where they were told, don't disclose that. They don't disclose it. And then they have to take a polygraph at some point to get a different job or a promotion or a higher level clearance. I deal with multiple people every week who are trying to get a TSSCI, a higher level clearance, top secret, involving compartmentalized information or something like that, or they want to get a job regardless of the clearance, and they have to apply and take a polygraph. So now one of the questions they're going to have to deal with is whether they've ever been investigated, and if they lied during that investigation. And they're panicking about it because they lied during an investigation because they were told to. There's a couple ways to mitigate that. One of them is if you can show that you were, even make the argument that you were told to provide that information, told to deny the marijuana use because it was only once or twice or something like that. A recruiter told you. Sometimes that's a believable form of mitigation because a lot of us have been there. We know that the recruiters do often, not all recruiters obviously, but
not the ones that are in the room.
No,
yeah,
I'm talking mostly in the military recruiter context. A lot of kids coming out of high school will smoke marijuana in high school, and the recruiter says, "Did you get caught? Did you get arrested?" No, then stop talking about it. And it happens a lot, and they won't talk about it. Or sometimes their parents say they don't really want to know that information. Don't tell them. So somebody tells them to just lie. They'll never catch you. They'll never know. And the reality is they'll probably never catch you. They'll never know unless you want to advance your career and get a promotion or get a job that is going to require a polygraph later. Then you're going to have to overcome the marijuana use and the fact that you lied about it, and that's what got you where you are, when you could have just told the truth the first time and you probably would have got the security clearance. So my advice is be honest, get good mitigation, go get some counseling, get an evaluation from your doctor that says that you don't have a drug problem, and you're probably going to get a security clearance.
Would secondhand smoke be a valid defense?
No. The biggest reason why is because you have to fail a drug test. So you don't usually get drug tested for a security clearance. You'll get drug tested for some jobs, but you have to intentionally use the marijuana, or you have to buy or sell the marijuana, and that includes investing in marijuana. So this is another thing that a lot of people don't know about. If you are intentionally seeking out opportunities to invest in marijuana, whether it's stock market or companies that you're giving money to, you're putting yourself in a position where you are buying and selling marijuana. So you want to limit those situations. Don't panic if you find out that your 401k is invested in some of those companies, because it happens sometimes. It's the intentionally reaching out and trying to invest your money into those businesses where they're buying and selling marijuana that could get you in trouble.
So I think we've covered the marijuana and the drug use, unless you think there's something that we haven't touched on.
No, I think we talked through it all.
And anything with alcohol, because we've got some financial issues I thought we would move on to.
No, I mean, alcohol is just, if the use is too frequent, and sometimes what we see is a DWI, DUI, or we'll see some people will call helplines, crisis helplines, things like that. If that happens, report it, because if you don't report that, the investigator, a diligent investigator, is going to get your background, your report. They're going to check on 911 calls, things like that, and then you're going to have to answer to an investigator about why there was a 911 response to your house or call from your house or something like that. Because sometimes when you call those helplines, they'll actually call 911, and they'll have somebody come out and do a health and welfare at your house. So if you try to hide all of that, you're probably going to cause some problems for yourself, when it's just easier to report it.
Awesome.
And we see those with alcohol a lot.
So if I'm starting to have financial issues, at what point do I raise my hand and report? Is it when I've got one late payment, my car is about to be repossessed? At what point, at which am I asking for help at the right time as it relates to my security clearance?
So this was one of those where if you had the 5-year periodic reinvestigation window for a top secret, or the 10 years for a secret, people would say, I'll get it in order in a couple of years and then I'll be fine. So maybe really high credit card debt, or not paying their debts on time, things like that. And if you got it together by the time your periodic reinvestigation came around, a lot of times there were no problems if you didn't have a judgment or you didn't have foreclosures, things like that. So now, under this continuous monitoring, if you get to the point where you feel like you're living outside of your means, you're going to want to report that, but not until after you start to put that mitigation in place. So if you're a month behind on a credit card payment or something like that, catch up your payment, and it's not going to be an issue. You probably don't even have to report it. If you're 90 days behind on a couple of credit cards, now you're starting to create a problem, and you're going to have to report yourself because you're clearly living outside of your means. If you fall behind on student loan debt, or if you have a tax issue where there's a tax lien against you, or you're not filing your taxes on time, things like that, you're probably you should probably self-report those issues, because if you don't self-report those issues, you're going to get pulled in, you're going to get those written interrogatories or that statement of reasons, and you're going to get the guideline E violation for trying to hide the information. But get the mitigation in place, and there's a lot of different forms of mitigation for a guideline F consideration, which is financial considerations. You could put together a budget so that you can submit the budget in your self-report and show, here's my budget, here's my plan, I make enough money, I'm not living outside of my means. And the concern is that you're not going to make enough money, or that you're going to take money from somebody else to sell secrets or sell protected information. So show that you make enough money. Catch up on the debt, whatever it is, and sometimes that means you have to reach out and make payment plan arrangements. So if you fall behind on taxes, whether it's federal government or state government, a lot of people don't know this, you can actually call and negotiate a payment plan. So if they say you owe so much money in taxes because you didn't file on time, you get hit with penalties, things like that, and you can't come up with the money right away, just call and make a payment plan. So you call, you set up the payment plan, and you make a couple payments, and then you've reported that you've fallen behind, but you can also show that you're mitigating the concerns, you set up a payment plan, you're doing the responsible thing given the circumstances, and here's proof of a couple of on-time payments to show that you're acting in good faith, you can pay back the debt. So that's a big one that we see a lot as well.
So in financial considerations, you have several other issues that can touch on, divorce, or, child support, or identity theft. Any of those have
all good mitigation. So
yeah.
Yeah. So what we see a lot when individuals fall behind on debt is divorce is a really common one, or there's a lot of times there's somebody in the family that gets sick, so or gets faces a period of unemployment. So COVID, a lot of people were out of work, but for whatever the reason, if you have a period of unemployment, but before that you were doing well and all of your debts were good, but then you lost your job, you can show that you were trying to get a job and you were unable to keep up with your debt, which you kept up with before you lost your job, then you're usually able to mitigate the concerns that way. So somebody in the family gets ill, whether it's you or a family member that you're taking care of. There's a lot of different reasons for financial considerations. And another thing to consider, a lot of people don't realize this, but sometimes the responsible thing to do, given the circumstances, which is all they're concerned about, the responsible thing to do could be to file for bankruptcy protection. Sometimes you're in a position where that's what gets you out of debt the fastest. That's what helps resolve those guideline F concerns. Not always, it's not always the best avenue, but sometimes filing for bankruptcy protection is the responsible thing to do given the circumstances. And I've actually personally represented individuals who have filed for bankruptcy protection because it was the right thing to do, and they didn't lose their clearance. We talked through the issues, we mitigated all the concerns, and we made good on everything that we could, and that mitigated the concerns, and the individual kept its clearance.
So let's talk about some real life experiences, even though you've touched on them. I was arrested for a DUI this weekend. Can you walk me through the steps I should take as a cleared professional? So,
yeah.
From, oh my God, I've, been arrested all the way through.
Sure. So you're going to hear the theme repeated, self-report. You always have to self-report. Again, we do it in writing because we want to create a record that we've reported, whatever the incident is, and because we want to steer the narrative and provide mitigation. So if you've been arrested, there's a couple of different things that you're going to be looking to do for mitigation. In this case, it's a DUI. So the first thing I would do is I would reach out for an evaluation from even your primary care physician to say that either you don't have an alcohol problem or that you consume alcohol within a responsible pattern of conduct. So that's kind of the buzzwords that you want to have in there. And this is a medical professional saying that you made a poor choice. We've all made poor choices. You made a poor choice, and that you still you can consume alcohol, but you're responsible about the way that you do it, and that you're following the recommendation of whoever you get that opinion from. Because sometimes it's, we think you have a drinking problem and you should no longer drink, or you should limit it, you should go to meetings, whatever that is, and you just have to comply with those recommendations. Because if you get help and then you refuse to comply with the recommendations, then that's going to come up, and that's going to cause you to lose your security clearance as well. So the big thing is get the mitigation in place, get an evaluation, go get some counseling. There's actually some online training that you can do. There's websites where you can go on and do some alcohol awareness training. We have people do that training. It only takes a couple hours. But we're building out, showing that you're remorseful in your actions, and we're building out mitigation to help mitigate any concerns that might be there before they allege them. So we provide all that mitigation in the self-report, almost like we would a response to a statement of reasons. And our hope is that they get that self-report and they say, well, we're not even going to bother with the statement of reasons because they've already reported it. There's no guideline E, personal conduct violation. They didn't omit any information, and they've already taken the appropriate steps to mitigate our concerns. So we're just going to leave them alone. And if you do the self-report right, they will leave you alone.
So what about, I just, went out to Ivor City and had an altercation with somebody, but I wasn't charged.
That happens. The key here, and those of you who have filled out the SF-86, the form to get a security clearance, you'll see in there questions about criminal conduct. And the question is whether you've been arrested or charged, or if you've gotten a summons to appear in court. There's key language in there. Don't over-report, don't interpret the question. The question is very clear, and it's asking you, have you ever been arrested in the past 7 years? Have you been charged in the past 7 years? Have you been summoned to court in the past 7 years? Have you had a traffic infraction where the fines are more than $300 in the past 7 years? Have you ever been arrested of a felony? So if you go out and get into a bar fight and there's no other potential guidelines involved, you just went out and got into a bar fight. Go home, sleep it off, and don't report it, but be careful because you could have been arrested, and that would have triggered a whole bunch of problems.
This one. I decided to have a weekend fling with a Russian national. What do I need to do?
I only know this one because we talked about this before.
I let him know that I was going to ask that one.
So that's a good question. And there's a whole bunch of different factors that could play into this. So if you had a fling with a Russian national in Russia and, that person asks some strange questions, things like that, report it because there's obviously a problem. We'll talk about foreign contacts. Foreign contacts, a lot of people don't understand this, is a two-part test. And if you read the SF-86 in detail, you'll see that it's a two-part test. First part is, have you or your spouse, they go on and on, have you ever had close or continuing contact with a foreign national? And then this is the part that everybody misses, with whom you have a bond, and there's a list of types of bonds that you could have. It's not a complete list. There's other reasons why you could be bound to that individual, but close and continuing contact, close or continuing contact, and then you have to have some type of bond. So something like that, it's gray area. You might want to report it, but if it's something where you're here in the United States, you meet somebody at the bar, or something happens where it's not something you consider to be close or continuous. You're not going to have continuous contact. You're not being asked questions about national security or something that could cause a trigger. Then you might not report that incident. If you're married, that's an issue because now you've got other guidelines at play. So if there's any other guideline that could potentially be involved, and there's a guideline for sexual behavior. So if something happens that could trigger any of those guidelines, then you're going to want to report that. But there's a lot of different things that could affect that situation. So it depends. You should get some help. You should talk to somebody about it and see if that's something that is reportable if something like that ever happens.
So when I'm talking to job seekers, I always let them know that they should be in close contact with their facilities officer, security officer. But friend or foe, we talk about this all the time, reporting in your relationship with your FSO, what kind of situations can go wrong with that, and then how much contact should you have with your FSO?
Okay, we've talked about this before, and I don't know how many people are security officers in here. Hear me out before being offended. So be careful about the help that you ask for from a security officer, because a security officer doesn't litigate security clearance cases. And the reason I say be careful is because some security officers are really good and they say, hey, you need to take this seriously. You need to go get an attorney. You need to get some help. And this is a big deal, no matter what the allegation is. Some security officers will say, it's not really that big of a deal. Just write right on a piece of paper. If somebody tells you to write on your statement of reasons, admit or deny, you're not going to win. you're going to lose your case, you're going to lose your security clearance. So some security officers just don't have the experience to know that this is a big issue. Even if it seems like a really minor issue, that issue could cause you to lose your clearance, lose your job, and lose your income, even if it's a minor issue. So don't write on the piece of paper. And to be clear, I think that these security officers, when they give this information, are trying to be friends. They don't, they're not, I don't think they're doing anything to intentionally harm the applicant, but I just think that some don't really have a full understanding of how serious some of these concerns can be. So you should get some help from somebody, especially if you think it's a serious issue. If you're getting a statement of reasons, it's a serious issue. That, they don't issue statements of reasons if they think that the issue isn't serious. So if it's one-time marijuana use and they issue a statement of reasons, it's not just that it's one-time marijuana use, there's something else there. Maybe they think that you lied on a prior application or the application to get the job or something. There's something else there than other than just the one-time. And when we do the responses to these statements of reasons, we also, part of the reason we don't just write on the paper or do something really brief is because this is also a two-part test. Number one, can you mitigate the concerns that are being alleged against you in that statement of reasons? And then number two, they're going to do what we call a whole person concept analysis. And the standard is whether it's clearly consistent with national interest in granting the clearance. So number one, we got to mitigate all the concerns. You got a DWI, we've got to get the counseling, we've got to show that you don't have a drinking problem, we got to show that it was just a mistake that you made one time, or that you didn't even do the offense at all, you weren't drunk and there's a problem with the test or something like that. That's mitigation as well. So that's number one, we try to mitigate the actual concern. And then number two, the whole person concept analysis. Are you military? What's your resume look like? Do you have awards in the past? Have you established a long-standing relationship with the United States such that the government should expect you to safeguard those secrets? There's things that we can put together as part of our response that shows that it's clearly consistent with national interest in granting clearance. So people miss that if they don't know that that second part exists, and that's a big part of the analysis.
So with the war in Ukraine, there's a lot of things that people want to do to help. But is there anything that cleared professionals should be wary of in their efforts to help?
Yes, and I know we've done some blog work and some articles that you guys have published recently on this issue because we're trying to get the word out. Stop. If you're giving money to companies in Ukraine, if you're giving money to
Airbnb.
Foreign nationals, Airbnb, whatever it is, if you're giving money to people in the Ukraine, stop. Because if you're giving money to people in Ukraine, you're supporting foreign nationals. You're giving money to foreign nationals. I get it. It's a great thing to want to do. I would like to get involved myself. I said, I'm a combat veteran. I'd love to get involved. There's things I want to do that I'm not in the position to do unless my unit gets mobilized, and then I can get involved more. But if you want to donate and help the people in Ukraine, make sure it's an American company. So if you're giving money to an American company that's then taking those funds to support people in Ukraine or efforts in Ukraine, that's fine. But if you are giving money straight to Ukrainians, foreign nationals, that's a problem, and that's going to come up, and it could potentially cause people to lose their security clearance. If you want to go and join the Foreign Legion, I guarantee you are going to lose your security clearance. There's a lot. I got recruited, because of my background. I actually got recruited. A couple of people have reached out and said, hey, we would like you to get involved. Can you come over? And I'd love to, but no, because I like what I do for a living, and I would like to be able to maintain a security clearance. And the problem there is the minute you go and join the Foreign Legion, you're joining a military force for another country that might someday fight against the United States, maybe not, but you're putting yourself in a position where somebody at some point is going to have to decide whether you're more likely to resolve a conflict of interest in favor of another country or the United States. So you're creating what we call a Guideline B and a Guideline C issue for foreign preference and foreign influence. Sorry. So you're creating potential foreign preference and foreign influence issues, and that's a tough situation. I have one of the leading Guideline B and Guideline C cases. It was an individual from the UK who was UK military, retired military, came here to support the project that he was working on as an exchange officer with the United States government before he went back, retired, and then came back to that same project. They gave him the clearance as an exchange officer, like a limited use clearance. Then he came here and he needed the clearance because he became a US citizen. his whole family relocated here. They're all going to college or doing things here. And they tried to stop him from getting a security clearance because of his ties to the UK and the military. We won the case in litigation and on appeal, which is why it's one of the leading cases. But you have to be careful about creating those potential Guideline B and Guideline C issues.
So is there anything on the horizon that cleared professionals should be keeping an eye out for?
There's
TikTok or
yeah. There's a couple things. So we talked about the marijuana use. I think 43 states at least now have legalized marijuana in some sense. Just be careful, with marijuana use. You get a lot of people who come off of active duty. I've been there, get off of active duty and say, oh, now I can smoke some weed or I can do whatever because nobody's going to drug test me. But if you want to maintain your security clearance, you can't do those things. When you get home, you still have a security clearance. It's not going to stay active indefinitely. If you leave the military and you hold a clearance when you leave the military, it's going to stay active for a period of time, and you can leverage that clearance to get a good job, a good paying job that requires a security clearance that not everybody can get. If you smoke marijuana, now you've created a really big problem because not only are you violating Guideline H, which is drug use, but you're doing it while you hold a security clearance. You might not be considering that when you do it, but it's really bad to trigger a Guideline H violation when you actually hold a security clearance. That's going to be more difficult to overcome. So that's a big one. COVID has caused some problems for us, whether it's financial considerations. Make sure that if COVID caused issues with your finances, that you're getting those things in order. Again, payment plans, settle what you can, pay off whatever debt you can, things like that. Make sure you're reporting it when you file for an application. Guideline I is psychological conditions. So some people dealing with COVID and other things have had to go to counseling, have had to do things where they've sought counseling. Again, that's a two-part test. Do you have a diagnosis for one of the conditions that they're concerned with? And it's things like bipolar, autism. There's certain conditions that they're worried about. Do you do you have a diagnosis for one of these conditions? And number two, does it make you less reliable or less trustworthy? So if you're honest about these things, you get a good evaluation, you should be fine. You should still be able to get the security clearance, but just keep those things in mind with COVID. I think that's probably.
So we're coming up on summer and, people are anxious to get out and start traveling more. Do you want to what are some things that we need to be considering when we're, going to Tahiti or going to Thailand or trying to get out from where we've not been for the last 2 years?
You bring up a good point because I wanted to talk about it and I forgot earlier when we were talking about the foreign preference. So there is what we call heightened risk. So, that the example, you have the one night stand with the Russian individual. The fact that he or she's from Russia is a bigger problem than if he or she was from Canada, because Russia is going to have a heightened risk associated with it. Canada, not so much. So the country matters. So if you're going to be traveling, make sure that if you hold a clearance, make sure you're talking to your security office and you're getting approval, or at least letting them know. We're going to do that in writing, right? Because we want to create the record of it. Make sure you're letting them know that you intend to travel. Sometimes you'll actually have to get approval to travel to some countries, not all, but some countries, especially the ones with heightened risk associated with them. And what I mean by that is it's a little tougher to mitigate offenses related to Russia, Iran, or other countries that might have that heightened risk associated with it. So just be careful. If you hold a clearance, try to avoid going to countries that you think are less friendly to the United States.
Well, is there a list somewhere?
Well, so normally what would happen is you would go, if it gets to this point, you go to hearing and the department counsel would provide notice of heightened risk, or that they're going to make the heightened risk argument. And I don't know that you could find an actual list, but we know what countries they are, right? They're Russia, they're Iran, probably Iraq, some of the countries that are less friendly, China, countries that are Korea, countries that are going to be less friendly to the United States.
So you mentioned China, and we were talking about travel. I know a lot of people consider adopting overseas. What kind of things do we need to be concerned? Because I know several of my friends have gone through adoptions, but they had to go through, and they all had clearances, and they had to go through additional steps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about the two-part test earlier, right? Is a closer continuing contact, and obviously it's closer continuing contact, and is there going to be some type of bond you're
Yep.
adopting them. You're going to be their parent moving forward. So it's obviously something that's reportable. So you should, if you hold a clearance, you should definitely work with your security office just to let them know that you're going to be taking these steps. You're going to have to go and do some visits and things of that nature to get everything in order. So make sure that you're doing that. Just make sure that you're being upfront about it. And again, do things in writing and create a good, strong record so that if anybody alleges anything in the future, it would be easier to mitigate.
Well, I've exhausted all of my questions. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Ladies first, and then the gentleman behind.
I'm trying to remember if it was, I feel like it's 2018 or 2019 when I first got the notice that they weren't doing my PR. And I didn't know what continual evaluation was, and I was like, why aren't they, investigating? What was my parents with that? So I feel like it's been going on that long. It's a pretty long time. And I read that it's happening in stages, and it's not fully happening across all clearance levels yet, or it is, or
Right.
just TS.
So the fact that you got that
Yeah.
notice is very rare.
If we could sort of reiterate the question
Okay.
for our audience.
Yep. So the question was, you received a notice that you wouldn't have to do the periodic reinvestigation and that you were under continuous monitoring and continuous evaluation system. And that's rare because most people still have to do the periodic reinvestigation. So it's very rare that an individual will be notified that they don't have to do the periodic reinvestigation anymore. They're trying to phase this in to take over, and they're going to try to phase out periodic reinvestigations, but it hasn't happened yet. So that's the plan, that's the goal. I think they probably already exceeded the timeline that they hope to be able to pull that off, but it's taken a while, and I don't know that periodic reinvestigations are ever going to go away. And then another thing to consider is which agency is it? So you've got a whole group of security clearances that are going to go, like, DoD clearances, contractor clearances, things like that. But then you're going to have the CIA, the FBI, different agencies that are doing their own clearance adjudication, and they're not going to use the exact same process. They're going to do the adjudications themselves, and then they grant their clearance. So sometimes you might get, for example, an FBI clearance. That doesn't mean that you have the same clearance that an individual in the military or some type of contractor or something like that. It might be a different clearance, and if you lose one, at least for a period of time, you can still keep the other. Sometimes there's bleed over, and it might eventually cause you to lose the other clearance. Probably will, but they're different agencies that are granting clearances. So being denied one doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose the other.
So, gentlemen.
Oh yes. So the guidelines you speak of, like these things that trigger like.
Yep.
Where do we get this?
You can Google it. It's really easy to find, but people just don't know what they are, that they exist. So a couple things to look up. You have the Adjudicative Guidelines, and that's all you type in, Adjudicative Guidelines. There's 13 of them. You'll see a couple of different places publish them. State Department's one of them. And you'll be able to go through, it'll tell you Guideline A, allegiance to the United States. And then in that, it'll tell you this is a potential concern, is the word they use. And it gives you a paragraph and explains what potential concerns are, things that can cause you to lose your clearance or be denied a clearance. And then right under that, this is why it's important to know this, right under that it says forms of mitigation. And it tells you specific forms of mitigation for each specific guideline. And you can read that mitigation and figure out what's going on in your life that you can plug in, or what can you do in the future that you can then be able to plug in to mitigate the concerns.
To help you kind of get the jump start on self-reporting something, because if you don't know it's wrong.
Absolutely.
You don't know to report it. So.
Yeah, so that's one of them. And then you'll see SAVE 3 and SAVE 4, SEAD 3 or 4. You can Google that as well. And it'll give you some of the things that you're supposed to report, and talk you through some of the procedures with security clearance adjudications as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good recommendation to at least look at them and remember, because we didn't really talk about this, but what happens if one of your kids, college kids, does one of these? How does that impact your clearance?
It would depend. I mean, so if it's a foreign preference issue or foreign contact, then they want to know if someone in your house is having close and or continuing contact, things like that. So that could potentially become reportable. Most of it isn't going to really apply to you if it's somebody in your house or a spouse or something like that. Where we see this, kind of the overlaps is if you are trying to get a clearance and your spouse is either a foreign national or now a U.S. citizen, but she's got bank accounts in other countries, things like that, that could cause problems for you. Or she stands to inherit property in another country, which is common. that could cause a problem for you, because then the question's going to come up, what are you going to do? Are you going to resolve conflicts of interest in favor of this other country or the United States because of everything that you've got going on in your life? So it could become relevant.
Sir?
You mentioned the State Department as a source for travel guidelines and advisories. What is their reporting update frequency on those places they've identified?
So the best thing to do is go through your security officer to get any of those updates, but it's usually driven by something going on in the world. So you're going to get a whole bunch of them about Ukraine right now, and there's going to constantly be updates. Something usually drives those updates. So anytime you're going to do foreign travel, I would check in with your security office. The biggest thing is just reporting you're going to do the travel before you do it. And that way you're good. You've created a record of it. There's no question about whether you're doing that foreign travel, as opposed to just going and then coming back and saying, my bad, I didn't know. You might get your clearance stripped for that.
And they have the direct connection of getting all those.
They should be following the updates, because they're the individuals that you're supposed to be reporting it to. And think of them as the middleman for your adjudication. So if they don't have the answers, they would be able to reach out to somebody that would have the answers, as opposed to every security clearance holder reaching out to that individual.
We have one question over here.
Yes, just to clarify, this is going back to your contact with foreign nationals. And in light of, our withdrawal from Afghanistan, in light of what's going on in Ukraine and other places around the world. And quite naturally, we have a lot of individuals who have, been involved in one way or another in different regions around the world in some of these spots. And what I wanted clarification on, when you provided the guidance earlier, was that more toward the contracting, defense contracting community? And I asked this specifically because, I've been just coming out of combatant command, staff. And so we went through a lot of this. And yes, we have many people engaging the security officers,
Right.
As well as our public affairs, with the things that they're doing and how should they engage media, and all that. And so we kind of went through a process to where folks, they didn't, I guess, make that big connection, this long time connection. Yes, there were connections due to past, endeavors and relationships that folks, reached out and helped.
Yeah, so if you're going to reach out and help foreign nationals, if it's part of your job, you're there for a contractor, or you're there as a contractor, or you're there with the military, or you're doing something where you're required to help these individuals. That's your job. You're deploying, you're being paid to be there, you're doing those types of things. You're going to have to report foreign contacts, the close continuing contact, and the bond. You're going to have to report people who meet that two-part test, but you're not going to get in trouble for assisting those individuals. It's where you're taking money out of your own pocket and you're giving money to a foreign national, or you see somebody in Ukraine, that you want to help, and there's some organization that says send us money, and you're sending money to a foreign organization. That's going to be a problem. Another thing to consider is people want to help. We want to help because that's what people like us do, right? We want to do the right thing. You don't even know who you're giving the money to half the time, or you don't know, if you're communicating over electronic means to somebody in Russia or Ukraine, whether it's somebody that you hope to be a partner someday, or somebody that you're just helping them because of the humanitarian crisis. You don't even know who those people really are. And I've dealt with quite a few cases where people have given a lot of money, a lot of their time, and invest heavily, and they're getting catfished. You're familiar with the term. It's not even the person that they think they're giving the money to, and come to find out it's somebody in Russia is tricking them and taking money from them and asking questions and having conversations with them, usually through text message or something like that. That's going to be a huge problem on a security clearance.
So if we have more questions, actually, Anthony has been gracious enough. He's going to stay after for a bit, and we've set up a private room where you can actually have one-on-one conversations with him. Just please be respectful of his time and that other people are waiting. But let's give Anthony a round of applause. And we're going to take about a 5-10 minute break, and then have our next panel, our two recruiters, answering questions about the job search and sort of the things that you need to think about now post-pandemic.